Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this month's Author Spotlight, hosted by Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation and California State Parks. We will be starting in just a few moments. And if you are just joining us, welcome. We will be starting in a few moments. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ed Tephorn. I am the Executive Director of the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation. We are so thrilled to have with us tonight Professor Charles Egan with San Francisco State University. We have a jam-packed program for you tonight as Dr. Egan talks about his latest book and his research. And so as we move forward with tonight, if you have any questions for Professor Egan, please feel free to use the question and answer box down at the bottom of your screen to enter any of those questions that you might have. We do have some time saved at the end of this program to try to get through as many of those questions as possible. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. We are the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation is the primary nonprofit partner working in collaboration with California State Parks to preserve the historic buildings at the former U.S. Immigration Station at Angel Island, as well as to uplift its histories and stories. And over the past year and a half, one of the things that we have definitely recognized is with the growing anti-Asian racism, the growing xenophobia targeted towards Asian and Pacific Islander communities, it is even more important now than ever to make sure that what happened at Angel Island is known by communities across the Bay Area, across California, and across the US. And through remembering these histories that we have the opportunity to learn and reflect. These histories are often so well preserved by the poems and inscriptions that are what helped to secure California Historic Landmark status, as well as National Historic Landmark status for the site. I am thrilled tonight to be hosting the program in collaboration with California State Parks, and my co-moderator, Casey Dexter Lee, who many of you may already know, will be joining us shortly. In the meantime, why don't we bring up Professor Egan? So for those of you who are not familiar with Professor Charles Egan, he is one of the foremost researchers on Angel Island and its poems and inscriptions. And I have the pleasure of getting to introduce Professor Egan today. He is a professor of Chinese at San Francisco State University. He is the author of Clouds Thick, Whereabouts Unknown, Poems by Zen Monks of China, which was awarded the 2011 Lucian Strick Prize in Asian Translation by the American Literary Translators Association. Welcome, Professor Egan, to our program tonight.
Thanks very much, Ed. I really appreciate it. You know, I've worked with AIISF for so long. Everybody's like family. So.
You are definitely part of the Angel Island family, and I am thrilled to be able to share with our supporters tonight the work that you've been doing to help translate and uplift the histories of the poems and other inscriptions that are at Angel Island. And I see that Casey Dexter Lee is on screen with us. So Casey, feel free to join us.
Hi, Casey.
Do you want to briefly introduce yourself to our viewers tonight?
Sure, I apologize for my tardiness. My name is Casey Dexter Lee. I'm an interpreter with California State Parks, and I work at Angel Island State Park. And I'm at the U.S. Immigration Station, the Barracks Museum that many of the inscriptions we'll be talking about tonight are located in. So if there's any spot you want me to go to, Charlie, I'm happy to move the camera.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And it's good to see you, Casey.
Good to see you too.
Casey's another member of the family, you see.
For sure, having lived and worked on Angel Island for 20 years.
For all these years, yeah.
Professor Egan, before we get started with your presentation, Casey and I just had two quick questions for you. One of the questions that I was very intrigued to ask you is that you first had the opportunity to visit Angel Island back in 2002, 2003.
Right.
And that really sparked years of passion and research for the poems
Mm-hmm.
and translations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if you can share with all of us watching, what might you remember from that first trip in
Sure.
2003?
Yeah.
And how has it
Yeah.
sparked your continued passion and dedication for so many years?
Thanks very much. You know, I was part of a very small consulting group. There were 4 of us, and then we were supervised by Daniel Kwan, the interpretive consultant who did the design for the new barracks museum and site. And we were tasked as part of the overall efforts when they were doing the restoration at that time that architectural resources group was doing while they were doing the actual nuts and bolts of the building, they asked us to look at the walls again to see what there was, and we worked for several months and then produced a preliminary report. It's showing our findings, and what we discovered was that there were many more Chinese poems that had not been included in the previous publication, Island, which is so well known to all of us. There were maybe up to 200 poems when there were 135 poems in that original publication. Plus, there are other miscellaneous Chinese inscriptions in prose, political slogans, and pictures, and also dozens and dozens of inscriptions in other languages: Japanese, Korean, Russian, English, Italian, French, and so on. And those had never been studied. So we did the best we could in the short time we had. We were only able to probably completely decipher and translate about 10 more Chinese poems. And nothing really much at all was done with the other inscriptions except to say where they were. Now, I had a great time doing this project, and then I was also intrigued just because of my own interests. You know, when I was in graduate school, I did both Chinese literature, but also Chinese art history. And I was really fascinated by calligraphy and the different calligraphic styles and forms. And decipherment is also something I really enjoy doing, whether it's deciphering cursive script on a Chinese painting or deciphering inscriptions from the walls. So it just became a sort of a hobby, as well as an obsession, I guess. So that you know, I was trying as hard as I could to do as a thorough job on the materials that were in the building. And the result, it took me 15 years, but finally Voices of Angel Island's out in print now.
All of us who are part of the Angel Island family are so lucky to have your expertise, your experience, but also your passion and obsession for deciphering.
Yeah, you know, the first time I went into the building, it was a wreck pretty much, because it was before the restoration really had gotten started. There were places in the floor in the barracks that you second floor that you didn't dare stand on because you might fall through. There was a lot of bad water damage on the southern side, as well as it was just dank and gloomy. Oh, that's a very good example of the water damage right there, right? Which took poetry with it, by the way. You know, there were originally poems that were there that were probably visible back, you know, when the building was used in World War II, but it was the period in between, from then on, that destroyed, you know, that wall. So it was quite an experience. It was you know, drafty, and your footfalls echoed everywhere, and it always seemed cold in there, you know, and but then you can't see anything until you actually walk right up to the walls and you realize they're all covered in inscriptions. The hospital was even worse. The hospital was a total wreck. And we went in to view. There were a small number of inscriptions there in the Asian men's ward, on the second floor. And it was kind of scary to walk in that building. You know, all the plaster was falling off the walls. The roof was a mess. It is now apparently pristine and beautiful, and I'm looking forward to visiting it, visiting the new museum when it opens up, maybe this summer.
We look forward to having you, as well as everyone who's watching. Casey, you also had a question that you wanted to start off with, Professor Egan.
Yeah, so undoubtedly so much work has gone into the behind the scenes research on each poem and inscription that you included in the book. Can you share a bit more about what that process looked like?
The process was, to put it mildly, slow, because the problem was that, the authorities during the immigration station period, and then again in World War II, saw the inscriptions as graffiti, and so they filled the inscriptions with putty and then painted over them multiple times. I think there were seven painting campaigns using lead-based paint, by the way, so you can't use X-rays to look through this stuff, on the walls, and so the difficulty is that when you're trying to read characters, it's like you're reading writing in the sand on the beach after a wave is washed over it. You know, they're very muddy looking, and so what Casey's showing right now, the multicolored sections in the middle, those have been restored. You know, they were experiments in restoration. Look above them. Those are the characters in the yellow are the ones that are really hard to read, if you see what I mean. So it was a process of trial and error and a lot of looking, but and then like say you have a 28 character poem and you can read about 15 characters or so, or 10 characters or so, then you can sort of work it out, work out some more of the inscription by thinking of common words that might be there, and then sort of gauging these, the smudges down below them to see if you can make them out. After you actually do make them out, it seems obvious, but before that, it doesn't. It can take a whole lot of time. I was also had a lot of times when I was showing my colleagues different smudges on the walls and asking their opinions. My Chinese colleagues at San Francisco State, my friend Maki Asano, who's also a professor of Japanese, was really helpful with me deciphering Japanese and then doing some of the translations. I'd say that the work that has just been published is really like a community effort, just like the book Island was.
All right, thank you so much. We're going to turn it over to you now to share a few more highlights from your research and writing. If anyone has any questions for Professor Egan, please type them into the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as possible during the program. Or
right.
After.
Thanks, folks. All right. So the Angel Island Immigration Station officially opened its doors on January 21st, 1910. Though often called the Ellis Island of the West, in fact, the site never became a portal like its eastern counterpart. Instead, it functioned as a detention facility for all the years of its operation and had been built in large part to discourage Asian immigration. Problem cases were sent to Angel Island, where the wait for adjudication could last a few days or many months. The old station barracks contains an extraordinary archive. Hundreds of poems and prose records in multiple languages are on the walls, inscribed by immigrant detainees between 1910 and 1940, and by POWs and enemy aliens during World War II. Chinese remains the dominant language on the walls, but Japanese is also strongly represented, and Russian, English, Spanish, Italian, French, German, Punjabi, Bengali, and Korean are also found. The Chinese writing at the station is widely known and is compelling because so much of it is poetry. Chinese detainees expressed their feelings of sadness, anger, and hope in scores of poems in classical forms. A group of 135 of these poems, augmented by individual stories of immigrants and a capsule history of the Chinese experience at the immigration station, formed the 1980 collection, Island, Poetry and History of Chinese Immigrants on Angel Island, by him, Mark Lai, Jenny Lim, and our late friend Judy Yong. A revised edition was published in 2014. The book is a classic in the history of the immigration experience, and many of the issues it raises concerning policies of exclusion, racial and cultural bias, fear of the immigrant other, and institutionalized inequality are as topical today as they were when it was published or when the poems were written. Yet the book was so influential that many members of the public think of Angel Island only in the context of Chinese American history. My new book, Voices of Angel Island, aims to broaden that view by transcribing and researching a selection of wall inscriptions in all the languages represented there, augmented by literary materials from Bay Area ethnic newspapers. Voices adds dozens more Chinese inscriptions to the record and has separate chapters on Japanese, Korean, and European and other immigrants, as well as a chapter on Angel Island in World War II. Each text tells the story of an individual, but taken together, they illuminate historical, economic, and cultural forces that shaped the lives of ordinary people in the early 20th century. The cultural reasons which led Chinese detainees to write poems on the walls were specific to them. Inscriptions in other languages tend to be straightforward prose, often only names. Yet these provide valuable research opportunities. In many cases, it has been possible to identify the writers and trace their life stories through public documents. In some cases, I've been fortunate to make contact with living descendants. Moreover, the Chinese were by no means the only group to write poetry about their immigration experience. There were great numbers of poems published in Bay Area ethnic newspapers. Today, I'd like to share a sample of all the inscriptions and literary materials I've found. The experience of arriving Chinese travelers during the years when the station was in operation was dictated by the terms of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Only a few classes of people were exempt: government officials, merchants, teachers, students, visitors, and family members of US citizens. Most Chinese would-be immigrants attempted to prove they were family dependents of US male citizens. As naturalization was barred to Asians until the Magnuson Act of 1943, for anyone of Chinese extraction to be a citizen required native birth in the United States. Those without true fathers in the United States often became paper sons or paper daughters. They were provided or purchased false papers identifying them as children of Chinese men who were US citizens. Because official records were so scarce, the immigration authorities had to rely on an interrogation system to match the stories of the applicants with those of the supposed fathers and supporting witnesses. The cumbersomeness of the process resulted in long delays and meant that at any one time, Chinese were the largest group of detainees. To pass the time, many carved poems on the walls. There are strong cultural reasons that moved Chinese immigrants to inscribe poetry on the walls. Poetry was the dominant medium of artistic expression in old China. Public poetry held a special social and ritual function, whether inscribed on a building, a tablet placed at an important site, or even carved on the side of a cliff. Generally, such inscriptions advocated harmony and the common good, and without them, the place remained somehow incomplete. Yet poetry had another public purpose as well. This medium was commonly used by the upright scholar to decry injustice and champion the oppressed. Speaking truth to power, even at personal risk, was demanded by the Confucian moral code. It is clear that every poet represented at Angel Island felt a strong responsibility to express the communal feelings of all his fellow immigrants about their detention and about the future. The poems on the walls reflect a community of shared experiences and values, and were a source of solidarity for detainees trapped in a limbo between the old country and the new. Classical Chinese poetry is a lyric tradition, thus most poems are short evocations of human feeling. The great majority of the poems at the station employ the standard classical shi forms, an average 4 to 8 lines. These forms are unfailingly regular. The line length is either pentasyllabic or heptasyllabic throughout, and each line is divided in 2, 3, or 4 3-syllable segments. Pairs of lines form couplets, and a rhyme falls at the end of every couplet. It's notable that none of the Angel Island examples uses the experimental free verse that was in vogue among Chinese urban intellectuals in the early 20th century. The immigrant authors were mostly boys and young men from rural villages in Guangdong, and they responded to their detention experience in traditional ways. The calligraphy of the inscriptions is remarkably good. Traditional education began with the art of the brush and daily copyings of the works of the masters. Most of the Angel Island inscriptions reflect the vigorous yet elegant standard kaishu style used in Qing Dynasty woodblock printed books and government documents. This style was designed for efficiency, but also to impress with its bold strength. Long sweeping lines and sharp angles characterize kaishu. For convenience, let us categorize Angel Island examples using the contrasting styles of the two most influential early kaishu masters, Yan Zhenqing from the 8th century and Liu Gongquan from the 9th century. This is Yan Zhenqing right here. Both are outstanding examples of the kaishu aesthetic, yet Yan favored thick, almost blocky strokes that gave his characters weight and monumentality. At Angel Island, compare island number 60, which is quite similar. Liu, on the other hand, and this is Liu Gongquan, used more slender strokes that are hard and sharp, and which gave his characters lightness and energy. At Angel Island, compare island number 2 as a pretty fair example. Some of the best calligraphic examples at Angel Island reflect a more individual running standard Xingkai style. The standard kaishu aesthetic remains, but the writer adapts it for rapid brushwork. The strokes tend to run together as the brush moves over the surface, creating a graceful interplay of curves to balance the strong skeletal structure. A fine example is this one on the screen. Let me now share some new Chinese poems from my book, Deciphered from the Walls. The themes are similar to those in the Island collection: homesickness and sadness, indignation about detention, trepidation about possible deportation, expressions of patriotism to China, and despair at China's weakness, and the desire for revenge. One new type can best be described as advice for compatriots. Examples provide cautionary information about barracks life and immigration regulations. And this poem, let's see, let me find my place here. Yeah, so this poem is on the first floor in the Chinese barracks. Clouds and hills all around, a single fresh color. Time slips away and cannot be recaptured. Although the feeling of spring is everywhere, how can we fulfill our heartfelt wish? Inscribed by a traveler from the city of iron in Xiangshan. 四面云山清一色，光阴去却复难得。随处皆然显春意，无人何遂心中得。This poem, also in the first floor of Chinese barracks, reads, "It's been a long time since I left my home village. Who could know I'd end up imprisoned in a wooden building? I'm heartsick when I see my reflection. My handkerchief is soaked in tears. I ask you, what crime did I commit to deserve this?" Inscribed by Lihai, South Village, Taishan. This one has more Confucian leanings. It's not really a poem. It's more of a prose inscription in equal line lengths. It's useless to become friends with those of narrow mind. It's useless to have wealth if one disdains the poor. It's useless to show off one's cleverness in daily affairs. Understanding human nature all comes from learning. Attention to details leads one to the proper way. This is one of 6 poems by a single detainee that were written on the second floor, actually in the European sitting room for some reason, which I think the Angel Island must have used space as they could. When they had an overflow of groups of one group, and they would borrow space from what was technically for another group, because the Angel Island Immigration Station was broke. It was according to ethnic and racial groups that they arranged the space. So this poem, which is actually again quite good calligraphy, reads as follows: Dwelling in the wooden building, I give in to despair. Between high hills and the ferry pier, my brows furrow in pain. Letters do not arrive, my thoughts hopeless. In bitterness and sadness, I watch for my early release. Another poem by the same author reads: Viewing the landscape arouses deep feelings. Sadness strikes the prisoner in the wooden building. Harsh treatment is hard to bear, and my heart is breaking. After more than a month of wandering, tears wet my cheeks. This poem this is a detail of this poem. The fascinating thing about this poem and its mate, which is only partially deciphered, is that these are the earliest dated poems anywhere in the immigration station. At the end there is a partly decipherable signature line, which states that this is from a year in the Xuantong reign. Xuantong reign, that was the reign of the last emperor of China. And there were only 3 years of it, 1900 and 1903, right? Or 1902. Excuse me, 1910, 1909 to 1911 is what it is. So, and you can see the word Xuantong quite clearly. So this has to be before the revolution, which is in October of 1911. So that's quite extraordinary. This particular poem reads: It's hard for Chinese to come to America. There's so much sadness in this place. The foreign slaves have always bullied and cheated our country. When the people are rich and strong, we'll destroy the foreign lands. A lot of immigrants that in Angel Island were actually planning to go to Latin America. And this poem is written probably around the early 1910s or up to about 1921, when Mexico began their own type of Chinese exclusion laws. So the writer says, I tended house and home for dozens of years. After thinking it over 1,000 times, I began this journey. When I arrived at the island, I was put in the detention center. Who knew that even Mexico forbids entrance? The last thing I'd like to show you from the Chinese chapter is this fascinating drawing that's on the wall. It's on the second floor. It's rather hard to make out here. I've done a line drawing of it, which looks like this. So you see it's a basket with a stele in it, with banners around it and flags. And what it is, it's an altar for the Qingming festival or the tomb sweeping day. Every year in April, it's tradition for families to go to cemeteries to clean and repair the graves of their ancestors. So it's like a family solidarity, family and ancestor worship day. And this shows that the immigrants were trying to maintain their culture even when they were stuck in a barracks in between the old country and the new. The top says, "Long live the Republic of China." The characters that are near to the sides of the stele and the butterfly say remembrance of the 6th of April, which is the Qingming festival, And then the butterfly is a sort of symbol of the unreality of life, based on a little story by Zhuangzi, the philosopher, who said, he dreamed he was a butterfly, but when he woke up, he wasn't sure if he was Zhuangzi who had dreamed he was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming he was Zhuangzi, right? And then there's a name of some kind of a society here, which is probably just here in the barracks, the Aichun She, the love for the multitude society, and all of the rest, most of the rest of the characters are family names, so that the good luck and sort of benevolence coming from this altar would affect all of them. Now, what's particularly interesting is this thing is really big, and there's almost no inscriptions carved around it, which showed that the immigrants thought it was really important. It's actually one of two altars that are in the building. There's a smaller one on the first floor. So let me switch over now to Japanese inscriptions. For Japanese immigrants, the so-called Gentleman's Agreement of 1907 to 1908 was the major factor governing immigration practices until 1924. Immigration of Japanese had been relatively free since 1894 under the terms of bilateral treaties. And the number of Japanese workers in California, Oregon, and Washington had swelled, particularly in agriculture. The territory of Hawaii attracted even larger numbers. 30,000 Japanese contract laborers were there by 1885. By the early 20th century, anti-Japanese sentiment had also grown. The Asiatic Exclusion League, a powerful voice for restricting immigration through to the end of World War II, in fact was founded in 1905 as the Japanese and Korean Exclusion League. In 1906, the school board in San Francisco voted to ban Japanese and Chinese children from public schools that serve the general population. The Japanese government was offended by this and other acts of discrimination, and so entered negotiations with President Theodore Roosevelt. Japan agreed not to issue passports to any more laborers intending to immigrate, while Roosevelt agreed to intervene in the San Francisco school plan and not move forward on a formal exclusion law aimed at the Japanese. A key exception in the agreement was to have far-reaching consequences. Parents, spouses, and children of Japanese residents in the US could be allowed passports and entry. One unanticipated result from the US perspective was the coming of the picture brides and the ensuing growth of the Japanese community. Young women in Japan were legally married to absent bridegrooms residing in the United States, often with their only previous contact, the exchange of photographs and correspondence. The new brides were then given valid passports to travel to this country to meet their husbands. Between 1910 and 1920, when Japan agreed to stop issuing passports to picture brides, the so-called Ladies' Agreement, between 6,000 and 10,000 were processed through Angel Island, in addition to the thousands of Japanese men who applied for entry through various exemptions. Nearly 20,000 picture brides settled in Hawaii in about the same period. At the insistence of the Immigration Service, grooms were required to come in person to Angel Island to meet their brides. The thought of the many happy meetings that occurred there partially counterbalances the weight of heartache of Angel Island detainees. The opening of the Angel Island Immigration Station coincided with a transitional period for the Japanese community. The history of Japanese immigration can be divided into two broad periods, 1885 to 1907 and 1908 to 1924. The first is characterized by the dekasegi ideal, which refers to the practice of Japanese laborers leaving their homes temporarily to work elsewhere. Japanese in California at this period were predominantly laborers who engaged in railroad construction or agricultural work, often living in primitive and temporary camps, kyampu, in rural areas. Life there was harsh, and leisure was often devoted to drinking and gambling. Subsequent to the Gentleman's Agreement, visionary community leaders like Kyotaro Abiko, founder and publisher of the Nichibei Shimbun, the Japanese American news, called for dochaku eiju, settlement of the land and permanent residency. A campaign in the newspaper railed against drinking and gambling in the camps and encouraged picture bride marriages and self-sufficiency through agriculture. Changes in US law closed the window on almost all Asian immigration. The Immigration Act of 1917 created an enormous Asiatic barred zone. Japan was not included. It was an ally in World War I, but this was to change. The Immigration Act of 1924 included a provision that barred entry to any person who was not eligible for naturalization, which effectively excluded Japanese without having to mention them specifically. Today, I'd like to share the fascinating family story of one inscription writer and then read some poems and literary materials that were published in Nichibei. When the Japanese-American experience is discussed in the media these days, invariably the focus is on the tragedy of the World War II internment. Yet the Issei experience that these texts represent predates that. Their lives were hard, they were homesick for Japan, and they encountered bias and discrimination. But at the same time, they remained focused on building new lives here. The emotions they express in the poems and prose selections were mixed, but chief among them was hope. This is one of the most interesting Japanese inscriptions that I worked on. And it was carved by a 14-year-old boy, Miyamoto Masaru, who was from Nikui District, Kawauchi Village, Asa County, Hiroshima Prefecture. And this was carved in 1912. Kawauchi Village is a agricultural village outside of the city center. Let's see, where are we? There we go. But the agricultural practice in rural Japan was sort of thrown into tumult during the Meiji Restoration as modern agricultural methodology was espoused, and so there were quite a lot of Japanese farmers who did take up the the opportunity to immigrate to find new lives elsewhere. Teenager Masaru Miyamoto arrived with his mother, Mitsuyo Miyamoto, on June 17th of 1912. They were traveling to join husband and father, Chiokichi Miyamoto, who was a farmer in Fresno County. Yet both of them were detained at Angel Island for several weeks for treatment of uncinariasis, hookworm. They were finally admitted on July 5th. Chiokichi and his wife had actually immigrated to Hawaii somewhat earlier, and Masaru was actually born in Hawaii, and as were his siblings. But when the parents moved to Hawaii, they, for some reason or another, probably because of labor regulations for their particular village, they borrowed the name of a friend from a neighboring village. So when they were working on the Big Island, probably on a plantation, a sugarcane plantation, they were known as Asaburo and Mitsuyo Hokoda instead of Miyamoto. After a while in Hawaii, though, Chiokichi moved the family to Hawaii and quite providentially lost his passport under the name of Hokoda and regained his name of Miyamoto when they moved in. Now, by October of 1920, Masaru was married, and his new bride, Kinyo Miyamoto, had also been born in Hawaii and was from a farming family in Fresno. Kinyo returned to California with her father, Taichi Shimonishi, subsequently, she and her father were held at Angel Island also for a couple of days. Kinyo and Masaru's marriage was arranged. She told the story of their first meeting to the family in 1986. One day she was riding her bicycle in Fresno when an old friend of her father, acting as matchmaker, drove by and offered her a ride. Masaru and his father, Chiokichi, were also in the car. Kinoyo had no idea she was being checked out. The couple had 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. They remained in rural Fresno, and where the family, where they had the children. And then in about the late 1920s, they relocated to Los Angeles, where Masaru started a gardening business. They like many other Japanese from the Central Valley, migrated to the cities because the alien land laws were in effect, and it made it very difficult for Japanese to maintain agricultural land. The family was interned during World War II at Gila River in Arizona, and then finally were able to return to San Francisco, return to Los Angeles. Where they raised their family and had many grandchildren as well. When they were in retirement at a Japanese, the Keiro, what do they call it? The Keiro Japanese retirement home in downtown Los Angeles. They were figured in a New York Times article about the reparations that had been promised to Japanese who had been interned, because the Congress approved those, but then there was a long delay before any payments were actually made, and so here is a picture of Masaru and Kinyo with the photographs of their 3 sons in U.S. military uniforms, and Kinyo is quoted as saying, "We trust America, but we doubt. We expect the American government to give to us, but too long over the years now. We doubt. We're not sure now." The article concludes as follows. Mr. Hokoda is growing deaf with age and leaves most of the talking to his wife. But in their small and tidy room, it was he who seized and proudly displayed the photographs of their 3 sons. "They're getting old too," he said, clearly pleased. 2 of them are retired. After the war, one son went on to own a lawnmower shop, one to work in a chick hatchery, and one to become a commercial artist. 40 years ago, we had a struggle, yes, but we managed it because my husband's a hardworking man. There are other sad twists to this story. Going back to the inscription, Masaru was from Kawauchi village, the Nikui district. That village is known in Japan as the widow's village because on the day that the atomic bomb was dropped in Hiroshima, up to 200 villagers from the same place were called into the city center to do some demolition work, and all were killed immediately in the atomic explosion. Kinyo's father had also retired to Japan and was living near Hiroshima. He was killed in the atomic explosion. Masaru's younger sister had been born in California, but then had moved back to Japan when she married, and she and her husband and their daughter were killed in the atomic explosion. Let me, on a lighter note, here is the Hokoda family today. Or pretty recently, we all visited Angel Island together to see their granddad's inscription. Skip over that one now. Let me just read some poems that I found interesting. She sends a wireless telegram to her picture husband and waits at the ship, hoping he will come. She is worried she'll be rejected by her husband, whose face and heart she has never seen. Although he said this season is not the best, she has counted on her fingers, and this is the joyful month. For the sake of her husband's success, she's taken jobs she's not used to, washing dishes and scrubbing floors. She yearns for her beloved husband in the picture. Yet upon arrival, she sees only the heartless immigration official. The suspicion of a disease of the eye on the island a long night. When the new bride was allowed to land in America, she made sushi. Camp. Plum leaves are falling in San Jose in the last gleams of a pale setting sun. In the distance, from the top of a bush, the broken cries of a shrike. In our corner of the tiny storeroom, I've grown tired of hearing Chico's stories of the strong liquors and the women. I wonder what the San Francisco night is really like. Only 5 o'clock and already the sun is gone. I somehow my world seems so small. I light the kerosene lamp and cook the meal. I'm on duty tomorrow. These attacks of rain and frost, the tomatoes won't stand them for long. I hated leaving my old hometown, but I'm worried about my future. As I hear the sound of the train whistle, I take off my dusty, sweaty shirt. Tomorrow may see frost. For tonight, I feel a cold wind. Pioneer. I cleared 100 acres of land with just my own arms, under the 120-degree sun, far removed from society. The bounty wrought by the sweat of my skin has come to naught. The crop has rotted in the fields. It's another great failure. From pennilessness, without help from anyone, I raised myself up. Now to pennilessness I've returned. There's no mystery to it. With my wife and children, there are 6 of us. But after tomorrow, how will we eat? If we cannot eat, then eat this flesh of mine. Under the 120-degree sun, having just my thin arms as my stake. As a pioneer of our race, in the field of brambles, I made the flowers bloom. By Okusuke in the Imperial Valley. Let me switch over to, we're running short of time. So let me switch over to Korean immigration. Korean immigration to the United States and its territories up to and during the period of the Angel Island Station's operation was on a very, very small scale for both cultural and geopolitical reasons. Korea was deservedly called the Hermit Kingdom in the latter part of the 19th century. The country became a prize for neighboring countries to be won. Japan, Russia, and China were all the competitors. Yet Japan subsequently defeated China in the Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 95, and Russia in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905. Japan's decisive victory stunned the world. With its rivals eliminated, Japan wasted no time. It declared Korea a Japanese protectorate in 1905. In 1910, Japan formally annexed Korea. The country of Korea ceased to exist. The Koreans who arrived in the U.S. between 1910 and 1940 were mostly refugees from the Japanese occupation, mostly young people claiming student status. The new arrivals received more of a welcome, relatively speaking, than other Asian immigrants to the United States. Their status as refugees and students gained them a measure of approval. Moreover, many were Christians, and they benefited from the advocacy of American church communities. Koreans often wrote poetry in the Sinhan Minbo newspaper, which was a key nationalist mouthpiece for Korean nationalism in that whole period. So let me just read you a couple of poems from that as we sort of running out of time here. Farewell by Jung Do Lee. When my heart is in pain like this, how can you be at ease? A sorrowful twilight passes on Angel Island, while a white gull wanders over the water. My heart as I leave you, your heart as you go back, leaving me behind. Ah, there is no use in crying. The only thing we have is sorrow. Can the death of a parent be compared to this? Can the death of a friend be like this? Our eyes welling with tears, an indescribable heart-rending farewell. If we could stop the wheel of destiny, you would remain in this land. written on the day when for the last time I visited a brother who had come with me, but was forced to return to Korea, leaving Angel Island. Let me just close with two more poems, and then we can get to some questions. I think, unfortunately, the World War II and the European and Russian immigrant inscriptions, I think, will have to wait till next time. Hometown Thoughts by Jinsil Son. Bright moonlight in late autumn colors the eastern sky. A flying goose cries, a blowing wind chills. The faces of my loved ones vivid in my eyes, the voices of my loved ones clear in my ear. Picture my old mother standing at the gate as if waiting for me. See my little brothers sitting alone as if crying for me. When I think of them, thoughts are endless. When I miss them, I feel faint. A lonely heart 10,000 miles away. All that fills my heart are thoughts of home. When the sword of the enemy flashes, my mother thinks of me. When the arrow of the enemy flies, my brother looks for me. When will we meet again? When will we see each other again? On that day, at my mother's knee, we'll pour out our sorrows. My prayer, an evil wind harshly blows. The waves of the world rise high. When wind and waves hinder my way, oh Lord, please save me. Please lead me by the hand and hold my body. When agony comes upon me, please guide me. And the last poem I want to read here is by actually a fairly well-known Korean American immigrant. His name was Wisok Cha, but in America he was known as Emson Wisok Char. And he's best known because he wrote an autobiography of being a Chinese immigrant called The Gold Mountain, which has become kind of a classic in the genre. But this poem was written when he was considering leaving. He says, "Let's go home." He writes, "Even though America is wonderful, it's not a place to live long. Asian peoples, let's go back to Asia. Even though this is not a barbarian land, when spring comes, it doesn't feel like spring. Though I've lived here half my life, I haven't seen a single flower. The yellow-haired alone are the masters here. Even if I live here forever, I'll always feel the sorrow of a foreign land. Though making a living is easy, life is more than eating. I won't allow discrimination and contempt to make me live like an exile. Though everywhere in Asia is poor, there too are sources of wealth. Let's take up hoes and dig the ground with our own hands. The Philippines is hot, but for poor people, the living is easy. And on the vast fertile change of China, one can live for long. Though the oppression of foes is terrible, the hills and rivers of my country are mine. Koreans to Korea, let's go home and live. Even though America is wonderful, it's not a place to live long. Let's quickly pack our bags and cross the Pacific." Thank you very much. And I think we'll stop here for some questions.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Egan. And thank you everyone for coming and joining us tonight. So we do have a few questions, and Ed, I think you have those.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Professor Egan. And I know that was a Herculean task trying to condense 18 years of research into a 35-minute presentation.
And as I say, maybe we'll have to do another one sometime for the other chapters.
Absolutely. We are more than happy to do that and to do a follow-up program.
Great.
We did have a question from Adam. With all the poems and that you've had and translations and inscriptions that you've had an opportunity to decipher and translate, do you have a favorite?
You know, it's hard to say that. They're all sort of like children to me, you know, because some of them took so long to do. I like them for different reasons, you know. I find that I read two poems by the one writer who did 6 poems on the walls. I think I like those the best as far as poetry goes. But sometimes the more rough poems are equally compelling because they're so heartfelt, you know. There's even a couple of poems that are really in kind of a poor colloquial, so using some Cantonese curse words and things like that in them. And And I find that very compelling too. So that's why I better not pick a favorite. I'll just say that they're all good.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We also had another question in regards to what is perhaps the biggest lesson that those of us living in the U.S. can learn from reading these wall inscriptions and their translations as we look back at the past?
I think it actually, the last few years show how important knowing this material is. And understanding it and learning from it, because what you find is that the anti-immigration sentiment that was in effect in the early part of the 20th century is not very different from the anti-immigration sentiment now, and that it's fear of the other, it's racial and religious bias. And it's the fear that people are coming to take American jobs, putting in quotes, right? So, the detention centers on the Mexican border today, but particularly during the last 3 or 4 years, are eerily similar to Angel Island in the period of its operation. So I think that this is a historical book, but it's all very relevant for what we're living through right now.
Exactly. And when we see some of the historical images of the women and the children who were detained at Angel Island, as you say, it's eerily reminiscent of, of what's happening on the southern border today.
Yeah. Yeah. You like many of the immigrants, they talk about, I found a couple of diaries by Japanese immigrants, and they really talk about this place as being prison. They're locked behind, steel mesh and so on.
We did have another question for clarification, in that all of the poems and inscriptions that you read to us in English today, they were all carved in different languages. But were there any poems or inscriptions that you included in your book that were written in English?
No. Nothing that was written in English, not a poetry. There are some English inscriptions on the wall, and I include a few in the Russian and other inscriptions section, by seamen from New Zealand or and Australia, that sort of thing. And I was able to study some of those inscriptions and find some, make contact with some families as well. But as for English poetry, no. I do include a few poems that I didn't translate, that were in Punjabi, that were translated in various academic journals, based on, there was a newspaper based out of Berkeley, I think, that was calling for Indian nationalism and calling for overthrowing the English, overthrowing the British. And they published a lot of poetry. Some of which has to do with their lives as sort of immigrants and other here, and those I found in translation, in these academic journals, and I cite them as such.
And Professor Egan, perhaps one last question as we close out today's program. Your book does such an amazing job of interweaving the history, the poems themselves and their translations, but also the research that you did to connect with the descendants of some of the people who wrote these poems or these inscriptions. I'm curious if you could speak to, how did the family members that you reached out to react to being potentially included as part of your research and in the book?
It was funny. Because what I was doing was sort of a reverse genealogy. I was finding some early inscription, and then I would try to follow public documents through to get this history of that immigrant and his or her, or actually it's his, because they're all in the men's barracks, his own immediate family, but then, if possible, to then go to the next generation, the next. And in quite a number of examples, I was able to figure out who descendants were, and I just wrote them letters, out of the blue. And most of the people were absolutely delighted by this, because genealogy, family history is something that a lot of the details get lost. And so many of them had no idea that their ancestors had been in Angel Island, and they didn't know a lot of the details that I was able to tell them about. And then reciprocally, those living descendants who I did find could then tell me their family stories that they'd heard, which I could then incorporate in the book. So, in almost every example, it was really, really a positive thing. There were a couple of letters that I sent off which were never answered, so people have their own choices about that kind of thing. I gave it my best try, and then I still presented what I could.
Well, we definitely appreciate those families who were so willing to share their continued journey of their ancestors and their family through Angel Island and beyond.
Yeah, and I want to thank them too, because they're they were a joy to correspond with.
Professor Egan, we want to heartily thank you for joining us today for this author spotlight, for your ongoing research and your dedication to uplifting the histories and stories of Angel Island. And I also want to give Casey a chance to share her appreciations and also share with our viewers an exciting announcement about Angel Island's reopening.
Yes, definitely. So again, thank you very much. I have been learning from you for, the entire time you've been involved with Angel Island. So I appreciate personally getting to listen to you, Charlie, and also your ability to share these stories and all the work and research you've done to create this book that's available to all of us. So for Angel Island, the Barracks Museum, the space I'm in, is open to the public now, and we are open Wednesday through Sunday, which is when ferries are running to Angel Island from Tiburon. San Francisco ferries are running Friday through Sunday currently, but that hopefully will increase in another week or a week and a half. And come on by. We aren't doing guided tours at this point, but there's a lot of the building more open than we normally have it, so people can take a look at more of the space within the barracks and see some of those writings that we heard about today. So thank you again to everyone for coming out, and I'll leave it to Ed to say our final goodbyes.
Thanks, Casey. And just wanted to remind folks that if you've not had a chance to check out the virtual 3D exhibit that Angel Island State Parks, Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation, and SCI-Arc collaborated on, this is the next best thing to actually being out on Angel Island. We also are so honored to be part of the Google Arts and Culture platform, so definitely feel free to visit that website to see some of the different historic photos and other artifacts related to Angel Island. And again, just a reminder that if you are interested in purchasing a copy of Professor Egan's book, Voices of Angel Island, in the chat, we inserted the website to insert a code and get a discount on the book. And so thank you, Professor Egan, for that special offer for the foundation supporters. And finally, thank you. And thank you to all of you who are watching this evening. If you enjoyed tonight's program, if you think the work that the foundation is doing is worthy to help uplift and preserve Angel Island Immigration Station, please stay connected to us. Please consider making a donation to us. And on the bottom of the screen, you see the social media handles for both Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation and California State Parks, Angel Island State Parks. So with that, we'll close out tonight's program. And just, again, thank you to all of you. Thank you, Casey, for being such an amazing co-host. And thank you, Professor Egan, for the wonderful stories and research that you shared with us. And we will definitely be following up with you to be able to share some more of the other stories that we didn't have a chance to get to today.
And thank you to AIISF and California State Parks for all you do. It's been a wonderful collaboration.
Thank you. Have a nice evening, everyone.
Thank you.